So hello everybody, and welcome very much to the Diversity Study Group Annual Review 2021. It's a pleasure to have you all here at this online event. We would have loved to do it in person, but obviously travel restrictions ongoing, we felt that we could reach a wider audience this way, and hopefully next year we can revisit our plans in that respect. My name's Heidi Heseltine, for those of you who don't know me. I am the CEO of Heseltine Recruitment and also the co-founder of the Diversity Study Group, or DSG. We've got a really exciting event ahead today, and we're going to be kicking off shortly with our annual review presentation from Jennifer Barrow. We'll move on to some case studies and presentations looking at practical examples of embedding DE&I, diversity, equity and inclusion. And those will be with Raphael Hubert, Edino Driscoll and Joanne Vranos and Paul Wogan. Then we're going to move on to a panel discussion, and that's going to be with some really strong senior management representatives as well. And those are Ingrid Upp of Schotten Sneldewaard, Jan Dieleman, Mark Cameron and Sue Yin Anand. And they're going to be sharing their thoughts on some of the findings from the annual review, but also very much talking about their rationale as business leaders for prioritising DE&I. As a slight introduction and background for those of you who don't know us that well, we were established in 2018 as the DSG initiative, and were formed in response to a growing concern in the shipping community about the lack of diversity in shipping and maritime, but also the lack of diversity data. It was absolutely impossible from a shore-based employee perspective to gain any insights into the global picture, where we stood as an industry, and also therefore impossible to measure any progress and to be able to benchmark against peers. So we entered into months of consultation with several organisations who were committed to improving DE&I within their organisations, but also across the industry. And in 2019-2020, we launched our first review, and that was looking at a broad range of data from diversity and inclusion demographics all the way through to looking at belonging and everything in between. So we also look at training, development and promotion, we look at salaries, we look at bonuses. So there's a raft of data being gathered so that over time we can look back as and when we need to track progress. In today's session, we're going to be highlighting the findings from our second review, which was conducted across 2020-2021. Alongside all of this, and with the support of our fantastic steering group, we've been running some networking events. We have been sharing insights into the work being done within the shipping and maritime sector on DE&I. We've also undertaken some bespoke DE&I training projects and done some consulting with key leaders in the industry who are really keen to support DE&I across the industry and reaching out as far as we can. And these discussions are ongoing and very encouraging at the moment. On a personal note, having spent my entire career in the shipping industry, I held a long-term concern that we were prioritising ships and cargoes as our assets, but not our employees, and felt that investment in our people beyond simply salaries and bonuses was really minimal, and that we failed to put our people and our working culture at the forefront of any agenda. I'm really optimistic that that's starting to change, and that the global shipping and maritime community is in fact aware that our people, our culture and our working environments are actually a business priority and an essential component of any risk management strategy. The data to support the proven business case for diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging is vast, and it's easily discoverable if you haven't seen it. Excuse me. And we know that whilst many other sectors started their DE&I journeys ahead of us, it's actually not that difficult for us to catch up because we can learn from the other industries. And I'm already deeply encouraged by the tangible steps that we within the DSG are seeing being taken. Business leaders are increasingly taking responsibility to prioritise DE&I and drive the necessary transformation within their organisations. And this is in order for everybody to have access to the same opportunities, the ability to share perspectives, to feel safe in speaking up, and ultimately to be able to make a valued contribution irrespective of their role, their department, or the level of seniority they may occupy. It's a journey that takes time, we know that, but it's one that we have to start and we have to undertake if we want to retain the talent that we have, but also attract future generations into our industry, let alone reap the financial benefits that truly diverse and inclusive organisations are proven to yield. With rapid developments with respect to decarbonisation, technological advances, and a global war on talent outside of shipping, much less within it, executive management and the shipping industry as a whole really need to be shooting this to the top of their agenda. There's no doubt that DE&I is increasing as a priority across all industries, and the volume of jobs highlights this and highlights some of the investment in D&I that's taking place. LinkedIn analysis in the 5 years up to mid-2020 showed a 71% increase worldwide in all D&I roles. The number of people globally with a job title Head of Diversity more than doubled. There was 107% growth. We also saw that those with the title Director of Diversity grew by 75% and Chief Diversity Officer by 68%. So make no mistake, this is happening and it's happening in other industries and it does need to be happening here. But as an industry with employees across the globe, we should be in a position to make good progress on our individual but also collaborative and collective journeys. Our annual review is also very much at the start of its data journey. But we're making really good progress and we'd like to thank our members for that as well, because without them, we wouldn't be on this journey. But we really look forward to continuing the journey with them and hopefully with you. And now I am delighted to hand over to Jenny Barrow. Jenny is the DSG's D&I advisor. She's got over 15 years experience in D&I, and that was gained with the global law firm Baker & McKenzie, but also as head of corporate responsibility for the UK's Financial Conduct Authority. She's also a D&I consultant and has worked on pioneering projects across a number of industries. So I am delighted to hand over to you, Jenny. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Heidi. I'm delighted to be here talking through this is the second DSG annual review. So what we're going to do is we are going to go through some of the highlights, some of the key data points that have come out of this year's survey. And of course, as Heidi has talked about, the DSG looks across this area from a number of standpoints. A lot of it is about developing a community of practice, encouraging organisations to collaborate so that we can change together. But today, what we're going to focus on is the core activity, which is about driving benchmarks so that the sector can measure progress. It's absolutely essential that you have some kind of data that shows you whether or not you're making that progress. Before I get into the substantive aspects of the data points, I just want to have a quick, a little bit about terminology here, because what we often do is we say these, we use various terms, and it's always good for us to revisit them, just to make sure that we all understand we've got a shared definition of what we're talking about. So here at the Diversity Study Group, when we say diversity, yes, of course, we mean the difference that we can see, our gender, our age, our ethnicity, but it means far broader things to us as well. It's about learning preferences. It's about neurodiversity. It's about educational background. So it's very much a case of the uniqueness that we all bring to our organisations. Equity is a term that has gained prominence over the last couple of years, actually, especially with the backdrop of the pandemic. And of course, this is something where we all have different circumstances. So equity is about acknowledging those circumstances, and we might need different support in order to access opportunities in an equitable way. And then inclusion Inclusion is a doing word. This is something where organisations need to work at this to ensure that the difference that we all have is celebrated, is welcomed. And in fact, it means that we have that sense of belonging, a term that Heidi used in her introduction. And we believe that together, this is how we can create really innovative and exciting places for us all to work and where we can all thrive. Okay, now we've got that, let's turn to the annual review. This year, over 3,000 people responded to the survey, and it was from a range of organisations, from ship managers and owners through to marine service firms and bunker traders. So a really broad range of organisations. The survey was conducted between October 2020 and September 2021. And again, this was obviously against the backdrop of the pandemic. And as Heidi mentioned, we ask a range of questions, from demographic profiles, salary, bonus bends, and all the way through to inclusion and belonging. Now, we think that the strength of this is that because it is run by a third party, it is run by the diversity study group, what we hope is it provides that sense of anonymity, that confidentiality, so that people feel that they can be really candid. And as I'll touch on later in the session, we certainly did see that, especially with some of the comments that people very kindly spent time giving us. So today, we are going to focus on some demographic profile information, as well as inclusion and belonging. There is other information available, and that's to members. If you are interested in getting involved, and we're going to be saying this throughout the session, we want as many organisations to get involved. If you're interested, please do contact Heidi. Okay, let us crack on. So when we look at gender, and by that we mean men and women basically, because that is where 99% of the respondents offered their data around this. So we've got a really good, valid data set here. And the overview is that 58% of respondents identified as men and 41% of women. Interestingly, when we look at seniority, we found that 27% of those who responded at the C-suite level were held by women. And that surprised some of us because that's quite high. And we're really interested to hear from the panel your thoughts on that, actually. Is that a key indicator? Is that representative of some of the pioneering members that we have at the moment who've done a lot of work in this area? So really interesting to see that high level. Unfortunately, that drops. It drops at the heads of department level to 14%. And another striking data point, at the junior level, we see 63% are women compared to 35% men. And this was something that we'd begun to see last year. And we weren't sure whether or not that was an anomaly. And what's interesting is that this year it's widened even further. So again, really interested to unpick what's going on there. Is it something about having more data? We do know some organisations really focus on collecting data at the recruitment junior end. Or is it because we know that organisations are doing lots around trying to encourage people from underrepresented groups into their organisation? So really interesting on that. We find that when we look at the data through the business area, IT, technical and fleet ops tend to be male dominated, both in the 80% there, a very big gap. So then we find that only 17% of women in IT and 19% of women in fleet ops. So there is a gap that would be great to close. And similar around part-time working status, 69% are women and 31% men. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. Interestingly, when we look at the comments, there is no two ways about it. So many comments were about the lack of women in senior positions. It was the most frequently mentioned area. Again, with accompanying areas around, well, how do you bolster your pipeline of talent? So we also collect age, and that is another data set which is very healthy. So the majority of people shared their age with us. Interestingly, the vast majority are in the 25 to 44 age range. And another something that struck us was that of those who work in the technical and fleet ops area, 40% are between 35 and 44 years old. And that might be something else for us to think about. Is that something that we need to look at? Is that something that as they start moving up and out, do we need to try and attract more entrants into that area? The next demographic area we look at is around ethnicity. Now, one of the strengths of the diversity study group exercise is that it is global. And we know that that poses different challenges for different organisations in different jurisdictions. So we know, for example, that there are some areas where organisations cannot ask for ethnicity related information. So this is partly why I think we have only a third of respondents providing this information. It is still way over 1,000 people. So again, still really interesting data set for us to unpick. What we find is that of those who responded, 100% of the C-suite respondents identify as white. At the heads of department level, we start to see some ethnic representation. 22% of respondents identify as Asian and 5% as Hispanic and Latino. But this is evidently an area where there is a challenge here in terms of ensuring that there is that representation across all areas of different ethnicities. Because again, we can see when we look at the business area, there is that lack of ethnic diversity in the middle office, the senior manager area, and the legal and insurance areas. So something that we really need to start thinking about. Another strength of the annual survey is that, as well as the quantitative information, we also ask for qualitative. We're really interested to hear how people feel included or whether or not they belong in their organisations. And a key question here is whether or not people feel safe to speak up. What we found, 75% of respondents do feel that they can speak up, 12% say they don't, and 13% preferred not to say. Interestingly, when we looked at this through different groups, there was very little variation. So there's something here about what can organisations do to position diversity, equity and inclusion. It's about all of us. So what can organisations do to encourage everyone to feel safe to speak up? When it comes to talking about discrimination issues, we find that only 67% of respondents felt that they could raise concerns. And here we did find some variation when we broke down by different groups. So here we did see that actually that drops to 63% for women, 57% from those from Asian backgrounds, and 52% for those from Hispanic and Latino backgrounds. So there is work there to be done generally, but also to close those gaps. Another interesting one, in the comment section, there was this overwhelming sense of people wanting to have more awareness about DEI issues, have more awareness, more training about how they can be more inclusive. And only 31% of respondents indicated that the training was available. Over half didn't have any, and 14% didn't know if they had any. So I think there's a great opportunity here for our organisations to harness that appetite and to provide more information and more training at the right times and for the right people in terms of how you foster a more inclusive working environment. As we move on, in terms of the comment section, there were some really great ideas. So we had nearly 400 people. And I want to thank those. If there's any people on this call, thank you so much for spending the time to give your free text comments, because they're really insightful. So some of those comments were about, well, how do you encourage leaders to role model inclusive behaviours? Flexible working came up, and it harks back to the part-time worker status. There was a real sense that flexible working should be positioned for everybody, whether you're male, female, a carer, a non-carer. And of course, the pandemic has given us an opportunity to really rethink what we mean by flexible working and how everybody can access it. A lot about how recruitment methods could become more inclusive. And I'm really looking forward to hearing some of our speakers today from Cargill, Gaslock and Ardmore Shipping, because I know we'll be touching on some of these, giving you some case studies about what organisations are doing. The other thing as well is around people wanting there to be more transparency around what organisations are doing. What's the strategic objective? What does our data look now? And I do think that that came from a sense of how can I play my part in helping the organisations become more inclusive? There's also that focus on developing the pipeline in terms of mentoring and sponsorship. And as Heidi said, I'm involved with a number of benchmarking exercises. And what really struck me, what was quite different in what I was picking up with this one, people were really encouraging in terms of one way of providing the experience and the necessary progression requirements would be for people to move around their organisations in different regions and different countries in order to gain the experience that they need to bolster that pipeline. And I thought that really struck me. I thought it was a great idea. And the last area that jumped out really was around organisations may have their policies, but are they ensuring that they are applied in a consistent manner? So they are the key points that jumped out at us. And as we are analysing the data, we're also struck by some further discussion areas, and I've mentioned a few already. But I think we were left with this sense that, yes, we know that there are challenges for some organisations in collecting the data. It's really encouraging that we have some pioneer firms who are really trying to grapple with that. And we know that that's happening in other sectors as well. So it's really important that shipping and maritime continue to work hard to gather this data, because of course it's an evolving agenda. And I think that's a really important message we want to convey today. This exercise is dynamic. This will of course have to change. We're really keen to ask further questions in future years. We're really keen to capture what's relevant to you right now. So the more members that we have, the more relevant we can make it to the sector as a whole. Because there's a great opportunity here for organisations to develop those benchmarks that will help you measure that progress, both as a sector and both as an individual firm. And the last thing that jumped out, and these two are really connected, is that the data is absolutely key. However, it is only a barometer about how inclusive, diverse and equitable your organisations are. And what came out of the comments is a reminder that we must continue to articulate the why. Why is this strategically important for your organisation? Because then you will create a relevant, resilient organisation that's fit for the future, that is going to encourage new entrants to feel that they can have an inclusive, meaningful career in shipping and maritime. So the last thing, all I want to say is that I think it's a really cracking start to creating these benchmarks, but let's keep on going. Let's make sure that we've got as many members as possible. So come and join us in making this happen. Thanks ever so much for listening. Over to you, Heidi.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Some really, really interesting and thought-provoking figures, and I know we obviously had the benefit of having access to them before today. In terms of your takeaway on this? We've obviously looked at things like, knowing that the data is a key barometer. We've spoken about transparency. And obviously within the data we've got, there's a fair amount coming up where we know we are working on gender and we need to do a bit more, a lot more, but also the same with potentially on the ethnic minority background. Is this something that you see replicated across other industries as well, or other industries nailing these ones and moving on to others? There's almost that thing of, look, this is where we are now, but is there what do we need to look ahead to?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the reason why organisations start with gender, for example, and age, is because they are the two data points that you can collect anywhere in the world, in most places, and also you need them in terms of this pensions benefits and such like. So it's core data, so you can understand why organisations start there. But what's encouraging, what you see from other sectors, and we're beginning to see it, I think, in shipping and maritime, is that it's almost a gateway to analysing other areas. You gain confidence in collecting the information, outlining, what that does is it provides you with tangible examples of what you do with the information. So it helps generate trust. Yeah. So that when you get to other areas, like sexual orientation, it could be ethnicity, it could be educational background, you're shoring up, you're creating a really solid foundation to say, for us, diversity is about us all. And so now we want to collect other data points that helps us measure whether or not we're inclusive of everybody. So it's a really good way of widening your data dashboard.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I'm really encouraged by, and I think you'll have seen this yourself from the members we've got, is we've got some large corporates, but we've also got, and we'll hear, from Ardmore, who they have a smaller shore-based employee population, but is still very much being able to prioritise DE&I as well. So I think it's really interesting as well how we can take this into organisations of all sizes and progress it. So yeah. Thank you. Anything else to add before we hand over to Raphael at Cargill?
The only thing I would say as well is that data is absolutely imperative, but it takes time to create your data set. So we can't use it as an excuse for inaction. So, it's a really good way of identifying trends, and hopefully over time your data set will improve, but there's lots you can do whilst you're doing that.
Great, thank you, and thank you so much. And looking forward, as you said already, to raising some of the queries from that with the panel in a little while.